Speakers Baroness Fox of Buckley.
I am sympathetic to supporting these amendments, but with some caveats. But I am very grateful to the noble Lady Mayor for raising these amendments. They're very important for us to address. But I think maybe they give us an insight into some of the broader issues in relation to the bill. One of the points of emphasis on the legislation is the victim, and contemporary culture tells us that we should believe the victim. I understand that for those of us frustrated over the years that domestic abuse was not taken seriously as a heinous crime, and sometimes when reported was dismissed, leading to tragic consequences, it does seem reasonable to be victim-centred, to put the victim centre stage. However, my concern is to ensure that due process is not neglected in this endeavour, and that we have nuance when we discuss who is the victim. We know from recent events, such as the egregious case of Carl Beach, that believing the victim per se can lead to false allegations with terrible consequences. And in the context of domestic breakups and family issues, sometimes when the bitterness of broken relationships centre, for example, on the custody of children, and we've heard many examples here today, then, ironically or sadly, accusations of domestic abuse itself can be deployed and weaponised to paint one party as a perpetrator and another as a victim, thus alienating the accused parent from their children, but without any guilt of what's been proved. It's just an allegation. But that allegation, that accusation of a domestic abuse in that instance, is a terrible stigma. Imagine that your parent has been labelled, your mum or your dad is labelled as an abuser by the other parent. That obviously can lead to great pain and parental alienation, and all without anyone's guilt being proven. And so I just want to remind us of the important principle of innocent until proven guilty and make sure that's not sidelined. Ironically, the noble Lady Britton claims that the very concept of parental alienation can be misused and lead to false allegations. Of course, she's right. But actually, that is true of any piece of legislation or any rule, because, yes, you can say that parental alienation can be falsely alleged, but so can accusations of domestic abuse be falsely alleged. But we're not suggesting we don't have legislation on it. And I do think that we might ask why in this debate we are so cynical and disbelieving of those who claim that they are victims of parental alienation. That seems very one-sided in a culture where we're told we should believe the victims all the time. I think it's a reminder that claiming to be a victim is not proof and needs to be evidenced, but there's no, it's not just in relation to one issue in relation to parental alienation. The noble Lady Hellich tells us that it is fathers who are the majority who claim parental alienation, and then seem to imply that this was proof of the misuse of the concept of parental alienation by perpetrators, which, to be fair, seems to suggest that fathers are perpetrators of domestic abuse, which, as I say, is an accusation that goes too far for me. And it reinforces my worries that there is a bias against one parent, often gendered, that is less based on evidence than prejudice. And I say that not as a men's rights activist, as somebody accused me the other day when I was making the point I was making this point, but as a women's rights activist who actually think that we should be fair in this discussion. Despite all of that, I am unsure about whether the resolution to my concerns, or even to the noble Lady Mayor's concerns, is to give parental alienation the statutory label of domestic abuse. Because another of my issues, and I think it's understandable that in an attempt to broaden the definition of domestic abuse from physical violence to include the likes of coercive control, I just get concerned that I'm wary of over-expanding the definition of what constitutes domestic abuse. because that can relativise the harm of serious abuse by conflating it with a range of behaviours that might occur when interpersonal relationships turn toxic. So throughout the committee stage, I will be wary of criminalising behaviours that are subjective or disputed and not areas where the law is best suited to resolve it. And I'm not sure where I fit in relation to parental alienation. So I do think that putting too much under the label of domestic abuse can ironically weaken the opprobrium that we attach to domestic abuse by making it a category that's too thinly stretched, a catch-all and not as useful as we'd want it to be, and that justice nonetheless might be easier, might be compromised, and it might make it easier to weaponise domestic abuse as an accusation and deploy it against others. So I feel ambivalent about putting parental alienation into that ever-expanding label of domestic abuse, but I'm wholly sympathetic to the arguments that accusing a partner or a carer of something like a domestic abuse can be used maliciously. It does happen for other ends, and it's at great cost to the family relationships and especially children. And I do hope that the Minister will give us some assurance that parental alienation is not a discredited category, but one she takes seriously, and that we can consider how we make it part of the bill without expanding domestic abuse too broadly.